In today's video, guys, we are going to be talking about 5 pistols that destroy the Glock. I'm going to be focusing on 3 things: relative price in regards to relative to one another, modularity, customizability. All of the guns that we're going to cover today do at least 2 out of those 3 things better than Glock. Also, I am going to be putting a list together for everything that we're covering in this video. First link in the description, and I'll also pin that link down in the comment section below. In order to really understand the nuances of how these other guns compare to a Glock, we need to actually dive in and look at what the Glock can do and what it can't do. For today's comparison, we are only going to be comparing all of these guns that we're talking about to the Gen 5. That's because the Gen 5 Glock can do things that other generations of Glock couldn't do before. Some of the things that I like about the Gen 5 Glock are they now have front serrations on most of the models. They now have modular optics on most of the models. And they also have a better grip texture than the Gen 3 and the Gen 4. And the trigger, this isn't it, this is an aftermarket, but the OEM trigger that comes with Glocks is much better than Gen 3 and Gen 4. But the Gen 5 does one thing better than all the previous generations that came before it. It does modularity much better. Prior to Gen 5, the full-size Glocks, like the 17 and the 34, the lugs on the barrels and the locking block in the frame were a different size than their smaller guns like the Glock 19 and the Glock 26. And so because of that, you weren't able to take a Glock 17 slide and put it on a Glock 19 frame because it just wouldn't work. Prior to the Gen 5s, if you wanted a full-size slide and a full-size barrel, but you wanted a smaller grip, you had to buy something called a Glock 19 long slide. This one's from Brownells, but it's essentially a Glock 17 slide and a Glock 17 length barrel that has the barrel lugs of a Glock 19. And you might be asking yourself, why would you want to do something like this? Well, for concealed carry, the grip is the part of the gun that's going to get exposed the most, but then you get a longer sight radius, so you're a little bit more accurate. It also has less felt recoil because of the added weight. So when the Gen 5s came out, like I said, they changed the barrel geometry of the lugs. You can now put a Glock 17 slide on a 19 frame. Only one problem: the springs of the recoil spring are exposed, meaning that dirt and debris can get into the recoil system and mess it up a little bit. For us civilians that aren't in the military and stuff like that, that's an easy fix. With one of these little slide adapters right here, it simply just slides into your rails, adds a little bit of a cover there for your recoil spring, so then when you put the slide on, it's nice and covered. Well, the reason Glock has been unifying most of the slides to fit the other frames is because they lost that military contract to Sig. That's the reason why we see the Glock 47 that just came out. It's essentially a Glock 19 long barrel with a Glock 45 frame on it. What that means is now you can have, when you buy the gun, they got the full-size slide, but you could also put the 19 slide on it, and now you have a Glock 45 essentially. Now, one thing that Glock has that none of the other guns have today is they have more aftermarket support by probably a factor of 10 times compared to any of the other guns that we're going to talk about today. There's probably 30 different trigger companies that make a trigger for it, maybe more. There's 20 or 30 companies that make aftermarket slides, sights, and all that stuff. Whereas some of the guns that we're going to be covering today, there might be 3 or 4 or less companies that might make a trigger for it, or no companies that make an aftermarket slide for it, or only 1 or 2 companies. And so one thing that Glock is going to have over all of these other guns is the sheer amount of companies that support them in the aftermarket. The other thing that Glock has going for it is a really low bore axis that helps mitigate recoil and helps you shoot flatter a lot easier than with something with higher recoil, like we'll talk about in a minute. It also has the most simplest design, meaning all the internals are simpler than everything else that we're going to be looking at today. Therefore, it's easier to take apart, easier to clean, and all those things. And so because of all those things, Glock has a lot going for it. But despite all that modularity, there's one thing the Glock doesn't do that this next gun does do. Now, these next 2 guns that we're going to be covering, I'm going to group them together because they're from the same manufacturer. The first one is the Sig Sauer P320. If you're unaware, in case you're new to guns and you're watching this video, with a Glock, the lower portion of the gun, also known as the frame, is considered the firearm. If you bought one of these frames separately, you have to go through a background check in order to buy it because it is the serialized portion of the gun. Well, the P320, this one has a removable insert, also called a fire control unit, that can go into any other grip module of a different size, whether it be from Sig Sauer themselves or from the aftermarket. aftermarket, which means you can buy different grips and slides and everything else without a background check because those aren't classified as the firearm. So Sig did something very right on there. Now, if I'm being really honest with you, I've never been the biggest fan of the P320 platform for a couple of different reasons. Mainly due to their really high bore axis. If you look at my hand here and where my index finger lands, as it goes down the indexing point, you'll notice how far away my hand is from the center of the slide. And the center of the slide is where the center of the bore is. This is why it's called the bore axis. But if you look at that same grip on a Glock, you'll notice how close my hand is to that bore axis. And the closer you are to the bore axis, the less felt recoil you're gonna feel, the less muzzle flip you'll get. The gun is just easier to control and easier to mitigate recoil with in general. And over these past few years of tinkering with the P320s, I've tested a ton of different slides, a ton of different triggers, a ton of different grip modules. Because of that, I never really liked the P320s until I put this guy together, which is a Legion frame. I have an aftermarket slide with a Parker Mountain machine compensator, and you'll notice that this slide is a little bit too short for this frame, but the addition of the compensator fills that gap. And that's something that we like to call flush comps. The good thing about the P320 is not only are they super modular, but they have a ton of aftermarket support, almost as much as Glock, but the P320 definitely comes in a close second. However, despite not being the biggest fan of a P320 personally, I can't deny the fact that, number one, a P320 costs about the same amount of money as a Glock, has almost as much aftermarket support, but has more modularity, and you can do the one thing to this that I can't do to my Glock, which is a flush compensator. As of right now, you can't do a flush comp to a Glock without doing a lot of cutting and grinding on some rails because of where they set the rails on the Glock 17 frames. And so because of that, I really wish when Glock came out with this Glock 47 that they would have given it a full length dust cover, but I understand why they didn't because of the military contracts. But if Glock would have made the Glock 47 with a full length dust cover, we would have been able to take in like a 19 slide that has a compensator on it, and we could have had flushed comped Glocks. Now, like I said, this is technically possible with a lot of grinding, and I'm gonna be experimenting with that in the future with some aftermarket frames so I don't destroy my OEM stuff, but it's just a bummer that you can't do that with Glock. And so the downside to the P320 is this. I love the fact that you can do a flush comp, but I hate the bore axis. Now, obviously with a compensator, it doesn't have a lot of recoil anyway, but it just still was missing something. Then I picked up the other gun that we're gonna be grouping with the P320, and that gun was the P365 XMacro. Now, don't pay attention to the slide on this. This is an aftermarket slide that I'm using. The only reason that I'm not showing the OEM slides is because I took the sights off of it to put them on this one, but it's essentially kind of the same. Now, the P365 is just like the P320 in regards to it has the removable fire control unit, so you can swap out the frame and the grip modules and everything like that. Now, before we get into the details about the XMacro, I had shot the original P365 when it came out, and one of its claims to fame were they took a tiny gun that was very subcompact, almost micro compact, and they increased the round capacity of the magazines to like 14 or 15 rounds. It was pretty crazy, especially for the size of the gun. And my buddy, Mr. Big Kid from the Mr. Big Kid YouTube channel, he had a couple of P365s and he kept getting these different grip modules for them, and I would shoot them, and I just never liked them. They were too snappy, and I'm just not a big fan of smaller guns. And then he picked up a P365 XL. I didn't like it because it didn't have a Picatinny rail so that you could, because when I conceal carry, I always have a light on my gun. But the main thing I just didn't like about them was I couldn't hang on to them very well, and they were just incredibly too snappy. Then the XMacro came out, and it brought 3 new features to the P365 platform. Number one, they increased the capacity of the magazines to 17. They added a Picatinny rail, and then they added integrated compensator into the slide. I shot it and it showed a lot more promise than all the other ones. And although I liked shooting this in its stock form, it just wasn't enough to make me want to carry it. And then one time I was out at the range with my buddy Mike from Tactical Considerations channel, and he introduced me to this guy. This is the Icarus Precision grip module. And this grip module fixes the problem that I had with the Glock and the problem that I had with the P320. If you remember with the Glock, I wanted to shoot a flush compensator. P320 could shoot the flush comp, but then I had crazy high bore axis. This one has insanely low bore axis that rivals the Glock. Additionally, this has the best ergonomics, grip texture that you could ever ask for with a gun. Additionally, it has really good thumb ledges. It's a really easy gun to mitigate recoil with. And what's crazy is when you look at the P365 in its stock form, next to a stock Glock 17 or Glock 47, you come to the realization that both of those guns hold 17 rounds. And when you look at that size difference, it really kind of blows your mind. Now, there was one tiny issue that I don't like about this current setup right here. It gets really hot. And it's no fault of Icarus. It's all because of the integrated slide comp. Because that slide comp makes the rest of the slide hot and that heat transfers down into the grip. I mean, don't get me wrong, if it's not like super hot outside, you can do a lot of shooting with this and it won't get too hot. But on a 90-degree day, this thing can get pretty hot where you're gonna have to let it cool off before you shoot it again if you're shooting rapid fire. And so, you know, for daily carry and stuff like that, it's not a big deal. And if you guys are interested in learning more about this particular model, I'll throw a video like right up here for you so you guys can watch it after this video. So although I love the P365 XMacro and I love the P365 XMacro with the Icarus grip, you know, the heat was kind of annoying if you want to go to the range or if you're going to take a class where you're shooting, you know, 500 to 1,000 rounds in a day. So Icarus Precision sent me a text about a month after I put that video out on that one and showed me this. This is a P365 XMacro XXL. The dust cover actually comes all the way out, almost just as long as a Glock 17. And because of that, you're able to either run a full-size slide or you can do what I did, and I have a True Precision slide for the compact, and then I have the Parker Mountain Machine Comp, and it fits incredibly flush to the frame. The other thing you may notice about this grip is I have a Surefire X300 weapon light on it. No other P365 grip will hold the X300, except for this one, as far as I know right now. This P365 XMacro with this flush comp, although it's not quite as flat, it rivals this $4,000 2011 that is the flattest gun that I've ever shot. This next one we're gonna look at does something better than Glock, but it doesn't do the compensator thing. And that's gonna be the Zev OZ9. Now this is based on the Glock, however, they've taken a different approach to it. And so what Zev essentially did was they looked at the P320 and they looked at Glock and said, why can't we have that modularity with a Glock? They created an insert that goes into an aftermarket grip or another grip from Zev. And at Zev, they sell the different color grips, they sell different size grips, and they also sell these chassis systems without anything in them. Like, meaning you can literally just buy the chassis system, you can go buy a grip module, and then you can put whatever parts into it that you want, and you can run any Gen 3 slide that you want. And that opens up a lot of opportunities for companies like Icarus Precision, who also created this grip module. These come in different colors, but I really like this bronze look. This one feels absolutely amazing. These are not released yet. He is making these for Zev Technologies themselves. I don't know what pricing is gonna be on these grips, but I'm told they could go up to the $400 and $500 range, but don't hold me to that. Let's just say these are $500. I don't know how much the actual insert is on these, but I believe they're about $300 to $350, depending on where you get them. Well, that's $850. Then you get a $50 lower parts kit, and then you can go buy a slide and all that stuff. And you could probably get out for less than $1,000 if you play your cards right. And this thing completely changes the feel of the Zev OZ9. And I'm able to shoot this much faster, and I'm able to hang on to this grip much better than I was on the original OZ9 grips. But how does this compare to Glock, right? Well, reliability, I'm not gonna ever say that Zev has the same reliability as OEM Glock. I've had a lot of problems with Zev over the past few years in regards to their tolerances not working out and triggers not working out and guns just not functioning. And that was guns that I didn't tinker with, that buddies of mine sent their stock Glocks to Zev, had them modified, got them back, and it wouldn't work. This one in particular is working really good and has been super reliable, but I can't promise that across the board on all the different variations of them. So they're not as reliable as OEM Glock. They cost a lot more. A standard OZ9, probably the cheapest one I've seen, is about $1,400 to $1,500. You can buy the inserts separately for about $350 and then put your own parts on it, so it wouldn't cost that much. But they are more modular than an OEM Glock, and they have the same amount of aftermarket support as OEM Glock. Now, this next gun doesn't really need an introduction, but it's the CZ P10C, P10F, or the P10S. Now, for a while there, these guns didn't have a ton of aftermarket support, nor did they really need it. They actually came with a pretty decent trigger. There was only one aftermarket trigger available for them for a while, and that trigger was the HB Industries trigger, which I've done a review on a few years ago. Great trigger, love it to death. Then Apex Tactical came out with the trigger, which, if for those of you who don't know, is my favorite Glock trigger and my favorite M&P trigger, which we'll cover in a second. Then Overwatch Precision came out with a trigger for this, and it is my favorite so far. Mine actually looks like this now. I had my slide milled with an optic cut and a compensator, and I had it done by the guys at Primary Machine. I did a review on this a few years ago, and this thing has been incredibly reliable, fun to shoot, and it's actually very, very accurate. However, one of the downsides to sending your slide off to have it milled and have cool stuff done to it is you gotta be without your gun for a while because you sent it off. So thankfully there are aftermarket slides available. I'll have more info about that over this list for you. This slide hasn't been put together, but this is the Reptile slide from Norso. You don't have to send yours in, you can just pick them up and have an aftermarket slide if that's something you're into. One reason why that might be an interest to somebody is the optics ready version of the CZs are very difficult to find. In fact, I've never seen one in the wild. If you want to put an optic on it, you're gonna have to send it off, get an optic cut, which again, you don't want to have to be without your gun, especially if it's your only one. So you can pick up aftermarket slides that are already cut for the Trijicon footprint, and you can simply take all the parts out of this, your OEM slide, swap them out, and now you're ready to go. But something I've recently learned about the CZ lineup, specifically between the P10C and the P10F, is you can actually take a P10C slide and put it on the P10 full-size frame, and it'll run perfectly. And that way you can have a more flush compensator. The jury is still out on whether or not the subcompact slide will fit on the P10C frame. I am waiting for confirmation from other companies about that. Also, most interesting about the P10C is this is the most affordable gun that we have talked about thus far today. The P10C is probably one of the closest things that actually destroys a Glock even out of the box in regards to having a good trigger, having good sights, having good grip texture, and having a very low bore axis. There's not a whole lot you need to do to these. To me, that makes this a better option than the P320. I'm not gonna say it's a better option than the 365 because that thing's just insane, but it's really, really awesome. So it's definitely something to consider. Now, this next gun does a couple of things a lot better than Glock, and that's gonna be the Walther PDP. I got this back in 2021 when they first came out, and I honestly thought I was gonna like it a lot more than I did. The main thing that I don't like about this gun is the grip texture. When you look at this gun, it looks like the grip texture is gonna feel amazing. But when I reach out, if I can't, my primary hand, it slips out of my support hand. If we compare that to the P10C, I can't get it to budge, or any of the other previous guns that we've discussed, whether it's Glock, whether it's the OZ9, whether it's the P320, or whether or not it's the 365. With these grips on them, I can lock my grip very well. This one, my support hand just slips, and that annoys me. It really just needs a good stipple job done to it. But aside from that, it does a bunch of stuff a little bit better than Glock. The trigger that comes with this is not that trigger, but the trigger that does come with this is miles ahead of a Gen 5 Glock trigger. And then this one has the Overwatch Precision trigger in it, completely changes that and gives it a much better feel on the break and the reset, and just makes it overall a better experience. The one thing that this gun does better than the Glock and better than any gun that we looked at today was that this one was specifically designed to swap the slides and frames around. In fact, most of it is very similar to a Glock. It actually uses Glock sights on it. So if you want to upgrade the sights, you can just order whatever sights would fit a Glock will fit this. Additionally, they sell all the different size slides that range in size from about 4-inch all the way up to I think 5.5-inch slides. You can just pick up the complete slide and throw it on any frame that they make. Now this one is currently the full-size model, and it has the full-size dust cover. I haven't gotten one yet, but I'm gonna get a compact slide and a threaded barrel with a compensator, and we can actually do a flushed comp on this without buying hardly any aftermarket parts. The only aftermarket part will probably be the compensator, but that's where it gets even better. These don't have a ton of aftermarket support, with the exception of the Overwatch Precision trigger, but they have a lot of support from Walther themselves. They have the upgraded triggers from Walther. They have different colors of slides and grips from Walther. They got green, they got tan, they got gray. I think I've even seen a purple one in there somewhere. And so I kind of put this gun on the back burner just because I got busy with other reviews and other videos, but I definitely want to explore this much further and see where we can take this, because this gun could definitely dominate. And it's roughly the same price as the Glock Gen 5 MOS. In addition, this one also has modular optics from the factory, and they do send you a plate after you buy it. You have to go to their website, give them your serial number, and they will send you one free plate for the optic of your choice. Anything else, you got to purchase it. And because Walther has put so much support into the PDP, you can buy these in a ton of different configurations. You can get them with Walther's upgraded trigger, with a threaded barrel, with a mag well. There is one big downside that Walther just didn't plan for, or failed to plan for, is although they planned for all this modularity, you still got to do a background check to buy the different grips because they didn't make it a modular chassis. But besides making this a non-modular chassis, and aside from the grip texture just not working for me, they did everything else correctly. You got a pretty decent bore axis on it. It uses Glock sights. They have their own proprietary upgraded triggers, or you can go aftermarket. They got a full length rail. Everything about it is almost perfect. Given that this is around the same price as a Glock, these are typically just as reliable as a Glock, and these are much more modular than a Glock, and they're not quite as customizable as a Glock because they don't have that much aftermarket support, but because they got the support from the factory themselves, this makes this a really good competitor that could potentially destroy the Glock. Now let's talk about the next gun, M&P 2.0, and in this case, I have the 2.0 metal. Now, I'm gonna have a full review coming out about this in the near future, so make sure you're subscribed, have the notifications turned on. So let me tell you a couple things that I don't like about the M&P metal. Now, keep in mind, this is not a complete review. They got rid of the flex, they added metal, but didn't add much weight, and so it's slightly got a little bit more felt recoil than their polymer counterpart. Additionally, it comes with a much better upgraded trigger from the factory. Now, usually with M&Ps, I always upgrade the trigger to either the Overwatch Precision that I have right here. More often than not, I upgrade it to the Apex because the Apex is the most configurable trigger that you can get for it. It was also the first trigger that you could get for the M&P 2.0. But you can set the weights of those from anything from competition weights all the way up to carrying at a police department. And both Overwatch Precision and Apex Tactical are approved at various police departments for use for their officers. Not every department's like that, but a lot of them are. Smith & Wesson did such a good job with this trigger. It's not quite as good as an Apex or quite as good as the Overwatch Precision, but it's so good that I'm not in a rush to change it, and I don't know if I ever will change it. Last thing that I don't like about this is it doesn't come with the suppressor height sights that are on here from the factory. These suppressor height sights are from Night Vision. I want to give them a shout out for sending these out to me. But what threw me off about all of this was it's modular optics, but it didn't come with these sights. Whereas the polymer version is also modular optics, but these suppressor height sights came directly from Smith & Wesson. But just based off those first impressions, my argument is the polymer one is a much better bang for the buck than the metal one. The metal one's $850, and these can be had for like $550 to $650 depending on where you get them. And they come with the suppressor height sights, and the newer versions of these come with that upgraded trigger that also comes in the metal. Now, with that being said, although that these don't come with suppressor height sights, Holosun also makes an SCS red dot for this, so you could co-witness with the factory irons, even if they're not suppressor height. Now, I don't have any of the smaller M&Ps, the one that has the 3.6 inch barrel or anything like that, but I do have a 4-inch slide, and I do have this one that has the 4¼ inch. And something I've noticed is you can take the smaller slides and put them on the bigger frames, no problemo. but they shoot just fine. Now, I'm assuming the 3.6-inch slide will also fit on this frame, and then you could compensate it, and you can also do the flush comp with the M&Ps. I don't have that 100% confirmed, but I did see some people on Reddit had done that. So to compare this to the Glock, the polymer version is cheaper than a Glock. It also comes with suppressor height sights. It's optics ready. And now the triggers are miles ahead of Glock without having to resort to the aftermarket. But at the same time, they also have quite a bit of aftermarket support from Overwatch Precision and from Apex Tactical. And there's also a trigger from Timney that's also pretty dang good that I've talked about in previous videos. And they got mag wells and base pads available for all these. So they have quite a bit of aftermarket support, not as much as Glock, but being that this is cheaper than Glock, more modular than Glock, and almost just as customizable, this could be a Glock killer. And in fact, if you watch my video from a few years ago where I talked about the top 5 best first handguns to pick up, the M&P 2.0 rated at the top of the list, and that was before they came with better triggers than they do now. Now, there is a bonus I want to talk about in today's video that I covered a few videos ago. Now, this is not a Glock. This is based on the Gen 3 platform, but this frame right here is called the SCT, and it only costs $50. In fact, this entire setup right here that you're looking at, minus this trigger, only cost me $499. I made this one as a bonus because it's not really a Glock killer, but this is the cheapest way to get a Glock clone with the red dot, with all that stuff. But if you want to know more about this, check out this video right here, and it covers everything in its entirety. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments section on which one of these was your favorite and why. But until next time, guys, I love you, and you guys stay sick.